This is Red Ice Radio. From the visible to the obscure. RedIceCreations.com.
Welcome back to Red Ice Radio. My name is Henrik. It's great to have you with us today. If you're new to the program, please take a look at our website, RedIceCreations.com, for much more. There you have all the details of what we are doing here. From Sao Paulo, Brazil, we have Dean Dominic De Lucia with us today to talk about his book, Hollow Earth in the Puranas. De Lucia was born in Bethesda, Maryland in the USA. He studied business administration at the University of Baltimore and later on completed a 2-year course in translating at the Catholic University of Sao Paulo. He has maintained a lifelong interest in Indian, Hindu philosophy and spiritual practices, which ultimately led him to take up Vedic astrology. He began his studies of the same in 1981 under Nalini Kanta Das, or Tom Hopke, as he's also known as, and he has been a rather constant student and practitioner of the art ever since. His articles were published quite a few times in the Astrological magazine, as well as in the newer follow-on magazine Modern Astrology, published in Bangalore. He's also written a book on the subject called Astrologia Vedica. Today we are going to discuss Hindu traditions, specifically the Vedas and the Puranas, as Dean has found accounts and stories in the Vedic scriptures related to the Hollow Earth, and the ancient ones, the demigods or the giants that are alleged to inhabit our inner earth. We are also going to discuss the search for the openings to the Hollow Earth and discuss both old and modern accounts and expeditions to the Antarctic and Arctic Circle. Many people probably have heard of Admiral Byrd's diary and his story, but there are more, and surprisingly many have involved Norwegian explorers. You might previously have heard of Olof Jansson's story. It's also known as The Smoky God, A Voyage to the Inner World, or Fridtjof Nansen and his Fram expedition. We're going to talk about them both today and tie in Vedic mythology and the stories of a northernly Shambhala. Stay with us for much more. Right, welcome to the program, Dean Dominic De Lucia. It's really good to talk to you. It's going to be interesting diving into the stories here that we're going to hear more about when it comes to the Vedas, specifically the Puranas, and then obviously the Hollow Earth theory. We have a lot of things to discuss that we want to get to, but first of all, welcome to the program, Dean. How are you today?
Well, thank you very much for the welcome. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you and to your listeners, and I'm doing quite fine today, really. Excellent.
It's good to have you here, and I guess I would like to lay the background to this a little bit as well, because we've talked with other guests in the past about the Vedas. They come up in many cases in reference when we talk about everything from mythology, really, to the prehistorical record that contain a lot of wisdom, a lot of interesting knowledge. But what you've been looking at for this book of yours here, the Hollow Earth in the Puranas, is about the Puranas, obviously, and I don't think most people will be familiar with that. So maybe you can break down that for us. Tell us what that is at the outset here, Dean.
Well, the Vedic literature, that's a very encompassing term. The 4 Vedas themselves are very ritualistic, very ceremonial. Then you have the aphorisms of the Upanishads, for example. They are very, very philosophical also. The Puranas are, they're historical narrations. They talk about the Vedic kings of the past and times way before the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, what those kings did, what their pious deeds were. The Puranas narrate the activities of great Maharishis and demigods that appeared on the earth and helped foster to, they helped to foster and they helped the human society to grow. They helped to guide human society. So the Puranas are historical narrations. It's a book of stories.
Very interesting. And so there's certain specifics, obviously, that are entailed in the Puranas. But if we would put a timeline on this, because it's always interesting hearing about estimates in terms of when it's believed that some of these scriptures were written. And if I remember correctly, basically the Vedic scriptures are believed to be around 1700 BCE or before Christ, basically. Is that about the correct time frame, or where would you place them in the record?
Well, the more accepted time frame, according to the Hindus also, even modern Hindu scholars. And remember, the Hindus were people who were developed in terms of astronomical observations, calendar systems, mathematics, algebra. These are the people who kept track of their own time, their own calendar, let's say. And the time that we're given was about 5,000 years ago that the Vedic literature was compiled.
Because this was an oral tradition, correct? So it wasn't actually until later it was written down. So we can't be certain at all how old the stories are, right?
Well, this is true. According to the Vedic literature, what you have, first of all, is a demigod civilization, a civilization, let's say, on the astral plane, where these mystic beings and these very pious beings would keep in contact with the physical human civilization on the planet Earth. And, of course, they would renew the teachings and the information from time to time. The tradition was oral. And what the Vedic literature tells us is that before the dawn of the Kali Yuga, the human being, the human body was, let's just say, superior to now, more developed than now. And it was typical for people to have photographic memory. So when we say that it's an oral tradition, that's the context for this.
And so would this entail then or mean basically that we're talking also about a period which was very different from now? Because if we look at other mythologies from around the world, they most of them, if not all, are referencing some kind of catastrophe, more or less, the end of the world. They have a story about the golden age or the paradisical type of society, and then they have a story about the end of it all, basically. So if we're talking about a time before the catastrophe, before the end, if you will, we might be looking at a scenario, a situation where not only the human beings were different, but also maybe even the planet. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what the Puranas give us is that time is cyclical, such that you have regeneration of the planet, of vegetation, or regeneration of human civilization, and it comes to an end also. This is what the 4 yugas are about. Now, one thing that I'll tell you about the physical condition of the surface of the planet, I'll run this by you. The surface of the planet had a cloud mantle, such as Venus has. And when this cloud mantle fell, and this is when the Kali Yuga was ushered in, this is when you had the 40 days rain and the 40 nights rain. This is when the human beings had a lifespan of 900 or 1,000 years. And you see this in Genesis in the Bible. It talks about this rain, and it gives the genealogical table, the different descendants, how they started off with a lifespan up in 900 years, then in 800 and 700, 600, until it came down to the current, typical lifespan. So the planet was very different, and the salubrious climate of that planet, the protection that the cloud mantle offered us from, for example, radiations, allowed the human being to develop very much more than currently.
So that, in your belief, then, is it's not just a mythological concept, or that something else was being communicated when it comes to the Bible, then, for instance, and also the Vedas, I would reckon, or the Puranas, that the age thing actually is literally they lived in the 5, 6, up to 900 years of age. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct, and this is what Olaf Jansen told us. He was a Norwegian boy who, in something like 1848, went on a fishing expedition with his father, Jens Jansen, and their family fishing sloop. First they went to Iceland, then they went to Franz Josef Land, and his father had the idea of going north to the land of Thor, where the sun never sets, and et cetera, and the little boy said, "Okay, Daddy, let's go." And apparently they found this this opening. They went into the hollow earth. They found a different world there, and they found this climate. They found this pre-Kali Yuga, climate, I think you could say, environment. So they found these people who still have the lifespan, 900-year lifespan. They still have a stature of 10, 11, 12 feet. They still have photographic memory. He mentioned that their apples there were as big as a man's head, and that a bunch of grapes will be almost the size of a man. A lot of things. He mentioned that their trees were bigger than the sequoia of California, trees that he had gone and visited, or later on he did. So there is a physical condition that existed on the outside of the earth as well as on the inside of the earth. What protected the outside was the cloud mantle. What still protects the inside is the crust of the earth, such that there is one Purana that states that in the hollow portion of the earth, it is never Kali Yuga, that it is always Treta Yuga or Dwapara Yuga. But it never, conditions such as we experience currently in the Kali Yuga, those conditions never manifest in the hollow portion of the earth. So it's a physical thing. It's science. It's physics.
How interesting. So we're in the realm of giants as well, and obviously this we're going to get further and deeper into this. Just a few more things I want to ask you about. Can you read Vedic Sanskrit, Dean?
No, I cannot. I have depended almost exclusively on translations.
Have you read many different translations? Is there any? Because this always comes up, and I know many people they're arguing obviously back and forth about translations and so forth. But is there any discrepancies as far as you've noticed?
Well, first of all, I am a university-trained translator, not with Sanskrit, between English, Portuguese, and Spanish, and really, it's quite a topic. Translation. What is a real translation? What is not? Is there such a thing as a literal translation? Is it more faithful, or is it mechanical? Do you become so mechanical that you lose the meaning? And I think that really the translations don't always give us the exact idea. I'll go along with that, especially when it comes to a topic, a concept with which the translator is not familiar, or with which the translator is not willing to pass along to the reader. And in this type of scenario, one thing that helps us is reading several different stories, several different narrations, shall we say, and comparing notes and coming up with common threads. This is something that helps us very much. But there are straight out comments in the Sanskrit which any layperson can understand. For example, in the Bhagavad Purana, the Madhyata is used to refer to the inner portion of the planet, the middle portion. And everybody who knows even a little bit of Sanskrit knows that Madhya, even in common Hindi, Madhya means the middle part. So translations, they're not perfect, they don't tell everything, but we get the general idea.
That's right, and there is even, well, some, maybe a few at least, etymological connections between the old Indo-European languages, and they're surviving in some cases even to this day. And when we're on this topic, we're going to talk more about the Norwegian expeditions that have been in the past. But when we're on the topic of Scandinavia, for instance, I just wanted to bring this up because I was researching a bit about some of the stuff here for today's program. I came along. Obviously, Veda, is you have certain letters being interchangeable, like D and T or P and V. There's a few of them, but Veda, if you have a T instead of a D in the middle, Veta, that's actually a Swedish word, means to know, and Veda is as far as I understand, means knowledge. Isn't that right?
Yes, you're exactly right. That's a very good etymological connection. I think you hit the nail on the head. And there are many such connections. not only between the Northern European language, even in the Southern European languages. In fact, I can relate something to you very quickly from this book, Our World Vedic Heritage by P.N. Oakes. But he was telling of an instructional film that was in Hindi, which was taken from India. And this was about in the 60s or 70s. And it was taken to Bulgaria, and they were showing this film in one of the universities. And there was some trouble with the translation, that they were stopping and starting and stopping and starting, and the translator wasn't remember everything, and he was forgetting some things. And the students themselves, they just rose up and said, listen, just start it over again and play it, because we can understand it. You know, it's similar enough to our language. We're following along. We know what they're saying. It's not that hard.
Well, there
just
you go.
Go ahead and play it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. So a lot of these connections are obviously there, and we'll get into some more of all of this. But if we for a moment go back to the cloud mantle and maybe talk a little bit about what would potentially explain this, because something must have obviously caused this to disappear. And I've heard this from some of the other guests we've had on the program as well, and they've examined this from another point of view. And again, this event then is in some regards, in some traditions, linked to a planetary catastrophe, basically, which is this marking point, the marker between one age and the other. And what would, for instance, explain these, why human beings were taller, why trees were bigger when this cloud mantle was there? More oxygen, perhaps, in the atmosphere, things like this?
Well, one thing I would offer, this cloud mantle, of course, would have been very thick, maybe a few kilometers thick. And I think it would have protected us a lot from the radiations from the sun, for example, ultraviolet radiations. This is one typical argument that is offered. Another thing is that if the cloud mantle fell, one explanation that is offered is that the intensity of gravity may have changed, the orbit of our planet may have changed. I could say something about that in a minute. But if there was a readjustment of the orbit, if there was some adjustment in the intensity of the planet's gravity, this also could have caused the cloud mantle to fall, to expose us to the radiations. And the gravity itself, more intense gravity, could be responsible for our shorter stature and our lesser development.
That's right. Really interesting. So
right.
We have stories here, obviously, as you mentioned, and coming out from other traditions as well, speaking about giants. I think most people more commonly will be familiar with the some of the ideas in the Bible, right? There was giants on the earth in those days. I think the passages or something like this. But there's more to this. There's stories about the Nephilim, a giant race of angels / people, wherever they actually were. So there's corroboration with other traditions here as well. But what have you found when it comes to the giants more specifically? Is this another set of another race, if I put it that way, or is it still human beings? Just the fact that they're larger in stature, Dean?
Well, what I would say is that there are other races of there can be other races of human beings, but maybe those races were not found exactly on the surface of the planet. Maybe they lived in cavern worlds below the crust, and in this way they were protected from the ultraviolet radiations. And then they simply come topside, just like the hollow earthers. They've also been seen in the Arctic area. They've been, well, they were seen by Olaf, but they were very high. I think that these races that we see are people from our own planet, not from other planets, not from other star systems. It's just that they chose at some point to come topside and interact with the human race.
And what kind of interaction was this? What level do you think that this was on? Where many people are talking about the fact that we were given the concepts of civilization and knowledge on how to do certain things. I mean, if we go back to this idea of the ancient ones, again, this is encapsulated in many traditions that we were handed much of the knowledge that we have today. And again, actually, even in some cases, you can even see in frescoes and depictions of the so-called God race, the ancient ones. You see them much taller, actually, in some cases. It's in the Sumerian or Babylonian, these tablets as well. What's your take on that?
Well, I can speak more directly from the tradition that I'm familiar with, and I can say that you can read right in the Puranas of visits from not only demigods through fire, because the Brahmins, with their mantras, with the frequency of vibration, they would, imbue the fire with these frequencies such that they could access astral planes of those frequencies and the beings in those planes, and request those beings to come and to help. And there are cases when warriors would come out and they would confront the demonic elements which were causing problems for human beings on the surface, such as the gray types or these subterranean entities. And also Brahmins would come with medical science and with knowledge. So that's, they did come, they were helpful, and also they would simply come from other planets. There's one sacrifice that's mentioned, some type of fire sacrifice or holy celebration in the Puranas, in which it's mentioned that the kings from the other planets came, the predominating deities, it's described, from other planets in the solar system, made their appearance to pay their respects and to participate. So simply those beings would come, stature and everything, and they would come to help the human beings. This was, of course, before the Kali Yuga. Now, after Kali Yuga, if you think about it, and this is something that I originally got from Jan Lamprecht, the South African who wrote the book Hollow Planets.
That's right.
Yes, he mentioned that in Scandinavian folklore, that there was tell of these giant holy men, these santas, that means holy men, who would come from the north on these huge sleighs pulled by different animals, and that they would visit the human civilization there, and they would help. They would drop off food in the winter and warm clothing and things like that, and they were shepherding and helping human civilization. But that they became dismayed with some of the habits that the people were developing, and I'll say as Kali Yuga progresses, such that they became a little disappointed and they stopped coming. So this first of all, this is where we get the tale of Santa Claus from, and second of all, this gives you an example, even during the Kali Yuga, of shepherding and visits by these hollow earthers, by these other races of human beings who are so tall and what have you. And their purpose was to come and to help, very simply.
Interesting. And I've always been intrigued also how potentially then the story would change from being perhaps a positive story earlier in time, and then later it's been turned into some idea that these people were demons, basically. And I think that the church were obviously instrumental in this, but the tradition obviously that you talk about there is called, the people is called Jötun, or Jette, or giant, as we say today, actually. That's the Old Norse for it, the Jötun. And do you think that over time as well then, and with the inclusion of Christian religion up here, that these stories would change into the fact that these were, evil beings or entities, Dean?
Well, there must have been something along those lines, and I agree with you. The church would have been the first one to spread lies and turn people against their own traditions and culture and the things that they knew. But certainly, if you take stock in Olaf Jansen, he mentioned that the human beings in the Hollow Earth they had that ease of grace, he said, which is a sign of good breeding. That's how he described them. So they're certainly they were not evil. That's for sure.
All right, interesting. I want to hear a little bit more later here about Olaf Jansen and his story as well. There's another story about a ship obviously going up to Norway that we're going to get into as well. But there's many aspects that we want to cover, and but I wanted to ask you as well: are we still, according to your view, in the Kali Yuga? Have we moved on? If so, when are we going to move on, Dean?
I'd say we've just barely scratched into the surface of the Kali Yuga. We're still on the cusp of it. It's supposed to last, according to the Vedic literature, 432,000 years, of which 5,000 have passed. Now, by the end of the Kali Yuga, it's described that the surface of the earth is desolate, it's desert-like, that even the human beings, they'll have a stature of perhaps 3 feet, and a man who lives to be 7 years old will be considered to be one of the wiser ones of the pack, that they will run in packs, and they communicate with each other through grunts. That's in the surface of the earth. Now, I'll run something by you, and I'll tell you actually how I got so interested in the hollow earth theory, what it is that rang a bell with me.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And this is that you hear in the Vedic literature this description, which I just gave you. So you say, oh, how terrible. And then you'll also read about the Kalki avatar, who appears at the end of the Kali Yuga in the city, no less, now we're talking about a city, of Shambhala, where he will be born in the Brahmin caste. So there's even a Brahmin caste being conserved here. Now, whatever happened to the grunts and running around in packs when you're 3 feet tall? You know, there seemed to be a real contradiction there, and that's unusual because, to tell you the truth, you usually don't find contradictions in the Vedic literature, not something as astounding as that, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember asking around even a couple decades ago, you know, how is this? And all I would get are vague answers like, well, maybe it's in the Himalayas, or maybe it's on the mystical platform, or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
When you don't understand, you have to take a guess, you know. But when you come to understand that Shambhala is in the hollow portion of the earth, and this is what Tibetan folklore, Tibetan collective memory tells us, what to speak of the actual Sanskrit in the Puranic literature, then everything becomes clear. The Kali Yuga, it takes place on the surface of the earth. The conditions described are on the surface of the earth, but there will still be a Vedic culture, there will still be Treta Yuga within the hollow portion of the earth, and you will still have this city, Shambhala, and a Brahmin caste in which Kalki will take birth. Now, it's also described that he will help to usher in the new Sattva Yuga, which is the age of goodness, where people have such a long duration of life and where people are characterized by great goodness. And he'll also help to do away with the demons amongst the population that were responsible by that time for so much suffering. So this is what made sense to me in the Olaf Jansen narration. He basically cracked the code for me. He explained it to me, that Shambhala is in the interior of the earth, and in this way there is no contradiction with the descriptions that of what will take place in the Kali Yuga on the surface.
And of course the stories we get here about Shambhala or Agartha, I guess in some cases some people use that term as well, or maybe if you want to put that in another bracket, Dean, I don't know about that, but the connection here obviously that we're getting to is that the entrance to the Hollow Earth is up in the north. It's an Arctic region type of thing, and hence obviously the connection to Norway and northern Sweden, northern parts of Russia as well. But with that, maybe we can go in a little bit more detail about Olaf Jansen's story then, and what form is this coming? Did you stumble on this over the web? Did you pick up a book? What happened there, Dean?
Yes, the Olaf Jansen story. Originally, I had become very interested in the Apollo debunking that was going on. Let's say this became a real quest for me by the end of the 1980s. And also by that time I was seeing the face on Mars, that kind of thing, which I just thought was bunk and ridiculous. I only saw it on the tabloids. Then I was watching the Sci-Fi Channel one night before I came here. This must have been 1994. And I saw a quick advertisement for the Face on Mars video by this Richard Hoagland. Now he has this enterprise mission, he calls it, this site.
That's right. We've had Richard on the program a few times, so we're aware. Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, he made a huge impression on me when it comes to artificial artifacts existing on the surface of the moon and debunking the whole Apollo idea. I got both of his videos at that time. And then I got involved on the internet. I thought it would be a good place for me to do some searching and try to reach out and make some friends, get some information. And I came across various anomalous sites, sites about anomalous happenings on the moon and Mars, and anomalous structures and things like that. And on one of them there was a link to the Jan Lamprecht site, and there was also a link to the Olaf Janssen book, which was posted on the internet. It's still posted. I have it posted on one of my sites. So that's how I got to the Olaf Janssen book.
Interesting. And so can you summarize it before, because it's a long story, understandably, and as you said, we can link this up as well, so people can go and read the full story for themselves, and it's a fascinating one. But maybe you could just summarize some tidbits for us, Dean.
Well, yes. Again, he went to Iceland with his father on a fishing expedition in the family sloop, and his father took him later to Franz Josef Land and basically said, let's make a run for it. There's supposed to be a land in the north where the sun never sets, and where the human beings there are they have a long span of life and whatever, and it's the home of Thor, which was one of the gods, Jupiter. And they went north. They went on a certain angle. They gave their angle in the book. And this basically put them above Greenland, between Nova Zemlya and, say, Ellesmere Island. And to the degree that they got to a point where to the degree that they went forward, the inner sun, they were sighting the inner sun through the opening. It would rise higher and higher. Olaf described it as a copper-colored sun. And to the degree that they would nose in, the sun of the solar system was disappearing on their fantail, disappearing on their rear. And they simply went into the hollow earth. They ran into a great storm, a whirlwind, whirlpool type of storm. They came out in calm waters a day or so later, and they sailed on a bit, and they came across all kinds of vegetation and huge trees, and there was a huge ship with people singing on it, and they were picked up, and everybody was a giant there, and they all looked like Scandinavian people with Scandinavian features. Of course, if the Scandinavians are next to the opening, there has to be some connection. There must have been some type of spillage, such that certain segments of society remained outside of the opening and certain segments within. Maybe this was right when the cloud mantle fell. And he spent 2 years there in the hollow earth. And he became familiar with their language. He said that their language was very similar to the Sanskrit, which you could even say nowadays about the Lithuanian language, for example, and various languages of Northern Europe. And he described how kind they were to them, and he described how they were advanced in science, how they had this great duration of life, and how they had photographic memory, and how everything grew big there, how the fruits were very succulent. And that's basically the story. He wanted to come back out, to go back to his mother with his father. They ran into problems. Their ship was sunk next to the ice. His father didn't make it. He crawled up on the ice, and he says that he was rescued, I don't know, something like 8 or 12 hours later by a whaler. And he made it back home.
Mm-hmm. And when was this? What year?
This was, I believe it was 1848 when he went.
1848. And
yes.
Because this story, as far as I've understood it, then weaves into this other expedition that was made by Fridtjof Nansen with the Fram expedition. The ship was called Fram, and this was he took off in 1893. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Farthest North book was written by Nansen. about that expedition. They've never admitted any direct connection with the comments by Olaf Jansen, but believe me, you, Hendrik, the European powers that be, royalty and whatever, I think that they've had a very definite idea that the Earth is hollow since certainly the end of the 1500s, certainly since the times of Drake, the mariner who would raid the Spanish ships. They sent Frobisher up to the Arctic to do some poking around with some very strange maps of the Arctic coastline, but it's a different Arctic coastline, very different. And there was testimonies. There was testimony in front of the Royal Society by the captain of a Dutch whaling ship, and this was right at the end of the 1500s. And this captain claimed that he had been up towards the North Pole several times. According to his reckoning, at one point he made it to 1 or 2 degrees away from the pole. And he claimed that the temperatures there would often get very warm and balmy, and that they would have to take off their jackets, and that there was simply no ice to be seen. It was not at all an Arctic scene or an Arctic temperature or anything like that. So by this time they were getting word, you know. And the Eskimos had always had these traditions and this folklore. So I think by the time Nansen went up there, I think at least he knew very well what he was looking for and why he was really sent.
That's right. I think it was almost like he was brought up to do this thing, and afterwards, of course, he gained quite an interesting life politically. And there was this other little thing I want to run by you in terms of the story and see what your take on this is, because one of his assistants during a specific time when he was working on some kind of health mission, I think it was for actually the Armenian genocide, he had as an assistant to this Vidkun Quisling, which actually the word Quisling in Swedish today actually is kind of associated with one who doesn't have any balls, basically, because he of course was the future National Socialist collaborator, the Nazi collaborator, and he headed a Norwegian kind of form of puppet government during the Second World War. And I just found it really interesting today to find that there was a connection between Fridtjof Nansen and Quisling, you know, and possibly because we know about the Nazis' excursions, we know that they went to Tibet. They had, look at their symbol, for Christ's sake, right? They were into the Vedic stuff.
Yeah, not only into the Vedic stuff, they were into the hollow Earth. They were convinced the Earth was hollow. And they had made some expeditions to the south and christened this, or claimed this certain area as New Schwabenland. And they had brought some aircraft with them, and they covered a lot of ground, and they searched a lot of ground. They searched for the opening. They didn't find it. But they were very well connected through the Vril Society. And, for example, Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, he was a member of the Vril Society. And Alice in Wonderland is all about underground worlds. But the Germans were very aware of the hollow Earth, that's for sure. We can say that.
Exactly. So with that idea, I think it was known by them, possibly because of intelligentsia. They gathered this knowledge perhaps from other European nations at the time. I mean, because they were just, when they set out, they were straight into the occult traditions. But this is possibly, again, something that the other royal houses of Europe had been working on, knowledge that they had for a long time. So this expedition here, though, as well, with Fridtjof, you mentioned something that he consciously let his ship freeze into the ice, and they drifted basically up to what was the parallel again that they drifted to, Dean?
Well, let's see. They sailed across the Arctic coastline of Russia to Novosibirsk. What is that? The New Siberian Islands. Mm-hmm. And then they shot upwards in September. And he went much farther upwards than he ever imagined he would be able to. And he just kept saying that there's no ice and the temperatures are not severe. And if I were to tell them this back in Norway and Scandinavia, they wouldn't at all believe me. And I believe he got right up to about 78, 79 degrees before he ran into ice. His ship had been designed to sit on the ice. It had a certain angle on the bottom, and it was so strong also with so many bulkheads, so reinforced, that when the ice squeezed in upon them, the ship popped up, sat a little bit off kilter, and just sat there right on the ice, and they spent another 2 years on the ice, just sitting on the ice. They were prepared for it. They brought supplies. That's
right. You said that, and it was interesting then because that means that they know what they were doing. But at the time, do you think that it was only Nansen who had the knowledge about this, or was the whole crew involved in what they were doing? What do you think?
Well, it would just be speculation. It's hard to say. He took one of the crewmen, one of the mates, with him when he made a shot himself. He saw that the ship was not heading where he wanted it to. They drifted back across to the other side of the Arctic, towards the European side, and he was thinking that the currents would take him right up to the pole. And actually, later on, the currents gave a turn and took the ship much closer to the pole than where it had been. But he became doubtful, and he took one of the mates. They went off on an ice sled with husky dogs that they had with them, and they made an attempt on the pole, or they made an attempt to see what was really there, to check out the mock sun, to see if they could gain entrance to the hollow world, if they could see it or something. But at least one other person, the man who went with them, must have been in on it. And what was his name? Amundsen.
Roald Amundsen, that's right. I was just looking at his name, actually. Go ahead.
Amundsen, yes, who discovered the South Pole. His nephew, was it his nephew? No, he was the nephew of one of the crew members of Nansen's ship.
Oh, really? Now.
So there, yeah, and of course...
Because he was, sorry, I just want to interject this for people who don't know Amundsen. You said he was, exactly, he went to both polar regions, basically. And I think he was one of the only ones that actually managed to get to both. I might have that wrong, but in any regard, he's like, he's bred to do these expeditions. And again, this was after both the stories that we've been talking about so far. This is around 1920s, 1910, something like that.
Right. So, yeah, it's very interesting. If he actually went to the South Pole, if he went close enough, I think that perhaps he knew what was going on, also. I don't think you can get that close to the South Pole or to the North Pole and not run across these anomalies that just smack you in the face and suggest polar opening to a warmer world.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, that's it. There were other people on the ship, I think, who were aware of what was going on, and probably Amundsen was one of them, just to give you an idea.
That's right. If we briefly go back to the Fram expedition again here, with Nansen, what are some of the more interesting things that stand out to you when you read a little bit? Because he had a diary, correct? Just the way that Admiral Byrd had his diary, right?
That's right. He did keep his diary, and he documented all of the anomalies that they ran across. Well, where would I start? Let's talk about the polar warming.
Yeah.
He was running across very warm temperatures in the high Arctic, right up there around 78, 80 degrees north, even in the middle of the winter. He was running across land birds in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. He was running across mammal life in the form of fox, in the form of wolves, and rabbits also, very large rabbits, on the ice. He was running across also bears and seals and walruses way up there in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, where they shouldn't have anything in the way of a food chain. He noticed the northward migration during the winter by the mammal life. It should be southward. They should escape. But of course, if you want to take shelter in the inner Earth, where it's warmer, the warm air flows out, then you would head north for winter at that point and not south. He ran across the Mach Sun. The Mach Sun was sighted, which apparently is the inner sun. If not seen directly, then its vision could be carried by mirages, really, which are warmer currents of air that bring about some type of refraction and carry the light over long distances. He ran across pollen covering the entire landscape, the icescape, and he was a biologist, a doctor in biology, and he had a telescope on board. As I say, they were prepared for this. He took all kinds of samples, and he identified the crimson and orange and yellow dust that was covering the icescape as being pollen. Of course, there's no vegetation anywhere near. More than 1,000 miles away, you've got the tree line even below the Arctic coast. Where would all this pollen come about such that there would be clouds of pollen whirling around in the air? The snow would come down orange and yellow, all full of pollen like that. Of course, Olaf Janssen told us that just inside the opening, along the inner lip, in a circle, that there were huge fields in just hundreds of miles of wildflowers. Now, when the winds are funneled out through the opening, the winds in the Arctic, of course, are very intense. It would just make sense that they would take some of this pollen with them and then deposit it in the air, and it would end up coming down in the snow. Another anomaly that he ran across was so much volcanic dust, so often, so overwhelming, that at times the icescape would become muddy and brown as far as the eye could see. They had to constantly clean off the deck of their ship. And he even made the comment in his logbook, he made the comment, dust, dust, dust. There's nothing to be had here but dust. It makes me want to go home. Can you believe that? Now, where are these volcanoes coming from that are depositing this dust in the air? There were no volcanic eruptions going on. There was no Krakatoa happening at that point. There were no active volcanoes in northern Canada or in Siberia or anything like that. Where's this coming from? Mm-hmm. The one explanation that is tenable and that explains all anomalies would be an opening to the hollow earth, of course. If you try to explain these different phenomena, these anomalies piecemeal, you end up torturing logic, let's put it that way. But the hollow earth theory certainly offers a tenable explanation, one that gives you that peaceful, easy feeling inside.
If we just for a moment, I want to carry on talking more about the North, obviously, here, but just for a moment to tie it back to what we began talking about, which is the Vedic tradition, the Puranas primarily. Do you think that these stories about this land up in the North, from their point of view, then, were given, or was given to them, or were they up there themselves? Were these stories that were given to them by the giants of the earth at that time? What do you think, Dean?
Yes, I think that the Vedic civilization is the Arctic civilization. The Vedic civilization is the inner earth civilization. And I would even go as far as to take sides with the Aryan invasion theory. Now, the Aryan invasion theory is strongly resisted by the Hindus. They say there was no documentation of any kind of warring or any types of battles in which India was invaded by Caucasians or Indo-Europeans from the north, and they like to bring up the fact that everything else was documented by their civilization in their Puranas in Sanskrit with years and dates. As I mentioned before, they had a developed calendar system, and they were advanced in terms of astronomical observations. So they say, how could there have been an Aryan invasion? And actually, I agree with them. I don't think there was an invasion. I think there was migration. I think that there was insertion of some type. The actual vehicle is not so important. But in fact, there is a theory in India that the Arctic is the home of the Vedas. In fact, Bal Gangadhar Tilak wrote a book. Tilak was the forerunner of Gandhi. He was a household name, and he was one of the people who first started the independence movement and the patriot movement in India. And he was certainly the most famous. Of course, then he passed away due to old age, and Gandhi came along and finished the work. But they were contemporaries at one point. They had met each other. But he wrote a book called The Arctic Home of the Vedas. And all he does is offer more and more and more testimony, more and more evidence to the idea that Vedic culture existed in the Arctic environment, that the Arctic environment was tropical at one point, and this could be accounted for by the cloud mantle, and that the Arctic Ocean was much smaller at that time, that the continental shelf was actually inhabited, and it was terra firme, it was firm land, and that Vedic culture existed there, and that this was simply an extension of the Vedic culture that was inside the planet, the hollow planet, and really no different than saying Western civilization exists in France, and then it exists in England, and then it exists in Canada.
That's right.
You know, there's some extension, that's all. Only that when the cloud mantle fell, when Kali Yuga came in, there was some separation, and I think that in order to escape the severe cold, that the Aryans did migrate downwards. And they must have introduced themselves to India, or they might have already had a presence there. But, something I'll point out, for the Hindus to have gone to the north, to have gone to Europe, and to have brought Indo-European civilization and language with them is completely and utterly preposterous, and it's just ridiculous to even argue the idea. First of all, in Northern Europe, they're all white-complected, we know that, and the Hindus can be rather dark. So it's hard to think that they went up to the European lands, to the Northern European lands especially, and that they spent time there, enough time to leave their culture behind them, to have their culture assimilated by the people there, and the Europeans being white complected and they're being dark complected. There's no trace, there's no remnant of that. And another thing, to go somewhere and introduce your culture, that's very nice. You might introduce a celebration day or some religious ceremonies or something like that. But to introduce Indo-European language, structures, conjugations, declensions, vocabulary, give me a break. I work with teaching English here in Brazil. I work with language. I see the efforts that have been done to introduce English to the educated population here. And, it's nothing that happens quickly. It just happens with a lot of exposure, huge amounts of resources and teaching, and over time, perhaps over several generations. So I think that the understanding of the hollow earth vindicates the Aryan invasion theory, although we would have to perhaps revise it and call it the Aryan migration theory or Aryan insertion theory.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in regard to clarify here, this in what order, I guess, this would have happened, because at first then I thought about if they come, from the inner earth, these giants or the ancient ones, whatever you want to call them, they come from the inner earth, and if conditions were well enough on the planet, that's when they wanted to move out of there and be on the land, and then maybe later when things got bad enough, meaning colder, etc., they moved back into the earth. But that's maybe not the way to run the chronology here. How would you say it is? Were they originally all on the planet and then eventually they went down into the hollow earth? Do you have an idea about this?
Well, what's presented in the Puranas is that again, the yugas are cyclic, and that where the Vedic civilization, the Indo-European civilization, is conserved is in the hollow earth, and that it is periodically reintroduced to the outer earth, to the surface of the earth. So I think that if we're going to give a starting point, it would have to be in the area that's protected, which would be in the interior of the earth, in the hollow part.
All right. You know what? I think we should take a little break right here and then continue in the next segment here for our members, because this is very interesting, and I think that we have much more to discuss. Obviously, I want to carry on in this tradition. But before we do that, then let's talk a little bit about where people can pick up a copy of the book, and if there's anything else in general you'd like to mention. I guess we should relay people further to your publisher, Grave Distractions. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. Grave Distractions has published as an Amazon Kindle book, and it's available through other distributors also. Hollow Earth in the Puranas, and I think that's the best way to find it. To perhaps Google Grave Distractions altogether, or just go to www.gravedistractions.com and then look up the author's name, Dean Dominic De Lucia, and just click on it and you'll go right there.
Absolutely. Gravedistractions.com, and we, of course, from the same publisher, had Rick Osman with us a while back talking about